Okay, it looks like everyone that's coming in has come in already. So we'll probably go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome you to Release Management with Force.com. My name is David Brooks. I'm a product line manager in the platform team, and been with Salesforce about 5 years. And I was a customer for 3 years before that. So I'm going to share a little bit of my insight with you as I go over the first couple of slides on what it was like to be a customer of Salesforce 6 years ago and kind of where the changes are today. I also have with me John Plax, who's a product manager for application lifecycle management, and Lali Verdad, who is in our IT organization, and they'll be speaking mostly, and I'll get out of your way and let the experts get up here and talk. Safe harbor statement, you guys have all seen that. So what we're going to talk about today is a couple of quick things. First of all, we're going to kind of give you an architectural overview of how we see different approaches to release management in the Salesforce world, and kind of what some companies are doing. Some companies are actually doing a blend of these. And then we're going to introduce you to a new product that Mark talked about in the keynote session this morning, which is the Cloud Deploy migration tool. That's John's product, and John will give you a demo of how that works and kind of give you an idea of where it is today and where it's going. And then Lali will talk about Salesforce.com's IT organization and what we actually use, how we use Salesforce and different applications, and how we do our migration, between those organizations and those different environments. And then we'll open it up for Q&A. Okay? So that's me. When I was a customer 6 years ago, there was no such thing as sandbox. I likened it to being on a tightrope without a net. You basically had to make changes within the live organization and configuration in place. And as you were making configuration changes, and at that point in time, there was no such thing as Apex code. There was no such thing as Visual Force pages. It was, as a matter of fact, I started when record types were actually were released, and we had custom objects and record types. That was it. But you made those changes on the fly. You made profile changes on the fly. Everything was done in place in the live organization. And for a lot of our smaller companies today, companies that don't have a sandbox, in fact, this is all you've got, right? This is what you have to do. But even for very large organizations, there are changes that happen in the live org, in place, and you need to keep that in mind as we're going through that. Now, I think about 6 years ago, maybe, now we introduced Sandbox. And I wanted to give kind of an overview for those of you who are not familiar with it. There are 3 different kinds of sandboxes that we offer. A full copy sandbox, which includes not only all of the metadata in your organization, but also all of the data, is included. There's one of those included as part of Unlimited Edition, and they're available for purchase with Enterprise Edition. Configuration-only sandbox was introduced afterwards, and that's exactly what it says. It's only the metadata is copied over, but that doesn't mean that you can't put data. It just means that when you do a copy of the sandbox, you only get the configuration, and then you use a data loader to populate that organization with some of the data, generally test data. And then Developer Sandbox, and by the way, 5 of those are included with your Unlimited Edition org and are available for purchase with Enterprise Edition. And then Developer Sandboxes are effectively configuration-only sandboxes, but with a limited amount of data available. So one of the things to keep in mind is that if you look at our cost structure, the data, the relational database storage is probably one of the most expensive components of our cost structure. And so you'll see us being very careful about size limits when it comes to data storage in that structured data storing. So as you add a sandbox, the first thing that you see is customers isolating business units from the IT project team, right? So I now have an environment that looks exactly like my production environment, where I'm able to do configuration, code, test, all of the different things that I'm trying to do on my project, whatever that might be. and I can do that in an isolated environment. And so it's a fairly simple process. You've got the sandbox, you initiate a copy, the data and the configurations go over if you've got a full data copy sandbox, then you make your changes. We're using the metadata API now, so fundamentally all of our products that deal with metadata use our metadata API. And so what happens after you've made your changes to get back into the production org, you use the metadata API either using the IDE, the Eclipse IDE, which has been available now for a while, or the new Cloud Deploy product that John will talk about. But you need to be aware of one thing, and that is that the metadata API is not a complete coverage of everything that you can do in setup. Now, it's not intentional, it's just we're working very hard to try to get that to be a 100% copy, 100% coverage of everything you can do in setup. We're just not there yet. We're working very hard to make that happen. But in fact, as we add more features, we're probably always going to lag a little bit behind. So you'll have something that's a manual change list where you use either the IDE or Cloud Deploy to copy your changes back into production, and then you have a run list or a manual change list where you'll go in and make the final updates. Now, when you get into a larger organization, a more sophisticated project, and in fact, as I said before, in some organizations, in the larger organizations, you may see examples of all of these in these organizations because it may just make sense to do that. But in a very large project where you have multiple developers working together, you'll have multiple developer sandboxes. You will have an integration system test sandbox where you're able to integrate these changes together from the multiple developers. Then you'll have a user acceptance test sandbox where you're able to get users in there and start playing around with the changes, make sure that makes sense. And if you have a change control board, you'll get CAB to sign off maybe in the UAT sandbox. And then you have a staging sandbox, which in general would be a full copy sandbox because you want this final staging test to be as close to production as you can possibly get it, so that you know that when you make these changes in production, it's not going to have any unforeseen problems. And one of the things to keep in mind is if you see the arrow on that stage 3 to promote to the stage 4 coming up, the deploy to production, one of the key things in this kind of a waterfall promotion is that if you're running this in a basic kind of organization, again, you're using the IDE, the Eclipse IDE, or you're using Cloud Deploy. But if you're an advanced user, you can use our Ant tool that we provide to do this. And the benefit of using Ant, it's a little bit more difficult. You almost need to be a certified propeller head to use this thing. But the benefit of it is that it's automatable and it's reproducible. And so when you're thinking about going from UAT sandbox to staging sandbox, not only are you trying to test the development that you've done, but you're also trying to validate the migration script that you're using with Ant to make sure that you're moving everything that's needed into the final staging sandbox so that when I'm ready to deploy it to production, I know that I can simply click the button and it's going to deploy the right things, the right pieces of metadata up to production. Now, Nirvana for large organizations, and something that we're looking at down the road to try to support in a lot more efficient way, is continuous integration. And in a continuous integration environment, what you're really doing is using your version control system, your source code control system, whatever flavor you happen to use, whether it's Subversion or ClearCase or whatever. But you're using that as kind of your source of truth. And so you're taking your metadata and you're moving it from production into your version control system. And remember that the metadata API is using XML markup to represent the metadata. And so you effectively have files that represent the metadata in your organization. And those files are XML files, and so they can be checked into a source code control system just like code can, right? And so in continuous integration, you're continuously, as production changes are happening, you see these blue lines coming down from the top, you're checking in the metadata into your source code control system as you're making these changes into production. And you have a main branch that represents production, and in source code control, you'll branch off on a development project, and as these developers are working together and checking in, you're checking into the source code control system. So you're not really using an org as the source of truth. A Salesforce sandbox is the source of truth. You're using your source code control system, version control system to do that. And then over time, as you've made changes in production, you have to actually make sure that you put those changes into your project branch and your main branch so that your test accurately represents a test in the production environment as well. Okay? And those are kind of the four models that we see. So, changes in place, a simple change with one sandbox, a waterfall promotion strategy, and the continuous integration. So kind of keep those in mind. And then what I'd like to do now is introduce John Platz. He's a senior product manager for application lifecycle management in my team, and he's going to show you a new tool that we just developed and show you how that would help you accomplish moving from environment to environment. John?
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. Can I get a show of hands before I get into some of the content? Who here has actually written a Force.com app or customized their CRM personally themselves? All right, now if we can take a show of hands, how many of you have created a Force.com app in a sandbox and deployed it through to production? So there's a lot of you, but it's fewer hands. And that's one thing that we realized is that deploying apps to production historically has been more of a challenge than we like it to be. The skill set required, I think as David used the term propeller head, is very apt. 2 years ago, at our Tour de Force event, we announced the release of our Force.com IDE and our Force.com migration tool for Ant. So these are desktop client tools that can connect to our metadata API and let you programmatically move your metadata around. But you really have to be a developer in most cases to be familiar with these tools like Eclipse and Ant. Cloud development really requires, though, as I think many of you know since you're attending this session, protecting your development process from your end users or vice versa. And so Cloud Deploy brings closure to that loop for the many people who are developing apps who are administrators or business analysts who are using the point-and-click tools to customize their sandbox, or who have started to use Apex but haven't really made that transition to becoming a full-fledged sort of traditional developer using tools like Eclipse. So Cloud Deploy is a new browser-based tool that simplifies the overall process of metadata migration by not requiring you to download these large apps and to work in more of a developer-centric model, but instead to use a very familiar browser-based Salesforce declarative interface to select the components that you want to move, to find out what their dependencies are, and then to simply upload them from one sandbox to another sandbox, or from a sandbox to production, or even from production back to a sandbox, and then just deploy them with a single click. And built into that, you get all of the security and trust that you expect from Salesforce.com. Now I'm going to say just a little bit more about that. So the security model for Cloud Deploy is what we call maker-checker. So the sequence of events to really authorize an organization to deploy changes from a sandbox to production. The important thing really to take with you is that all of the changes that are made through Cloud Deploy are made by a user with rights in the system where the deployment will occur. So if I'm an admin and I control my production environment and I have a sandbox for my developer in some cases may not have rights to log into production. If I'm working in the financial sector or maybe healthcare, I may have some very stringent controls about who can log into my production system. And so we've heard this from a lot of our customers. We wanted to build a solution that maintained the simplicity of Salesforce.com, but also respected those complex scenarios where you need to have some isolation and extra protection on the production environment. So all of the authorizations to upload changes and to apply changes are done by a user in the org where the changes will occur. So if I'm the admin, the production admin, my developer can go into his sandbox and make all the changes, write the Apex classes, bundle them up, and upload them to my org. But they don't get applied to my end users until I go in, review the changes, and actually click the button, myself or any user with rights in the production system or the target system. So let me show you that right now. So I am logged into a developer sandbox. You can see here, force.com sandbox dev. And to find Cloud Deploy, what I want to do is just go up into Setup. And over in the left, in our last release, in our 2 releases ago, we added a new node called Deploy under App Setup. And in Winter 10, we just introduced 3 new links here. And these are the links that represent Cloud Deploy. So the first thing I want to show you are our deployment connections. So from my developer org, I see this pre-populated list of all of my sandboxes and my production organization, plus the one that I'm logged into. So in this case, I've created 3 sandboxes. I'm in dev, there's dev 2, and then there's IST for integration and system test, and then finally there's my production organization. And here on the right, you can see that for each of these relationships, each of these connections, there is an authorization, and it's bidirectional. So here within my developer sandbox, if I wanted to say authorize changes from dev 2, I just have to edit it, and then enable inbound changes. So there's one checkbox in this whole form. The only thing I can control is whether I allow inbound changes to be sent to me. The outbound changes is controlled on the other side of this connection. So I would have to have a login to my dev2 sandbox to make this checkbox change. And on that side, it would be the same thing. I would actually be seeing inbound changes from my dev sandbox. And so when I save that and go back to my deployment connection screen, you'll be able to see that now it's represented by a bidirectional arrow. So one thing to be aware of is that we've elected not to have more fine-grained security in the connection model. We felt that it was really important to maintain the simplicity of this. So basically, there is a single profile permission for create and upload a change set. And that lets you upload a change set to any other related sandbox or the production org that has authorized connections across the wire. So what I want to go do now is actually create an outbound change set. So if I click new here, I can just give it a name. So I've created a survey application. You know, and this is my Dreamforce demo. So now I have a new empty change set. And you'll notice that it has a status of open. The first thing that I really want to do here is click the Add button. And this is going to let me select from all of the metadata API exposed types. The one exception is that we don't support profiles yet, but everything else in the metadata API is also exposed through change sets. And you can see, so workflow rules, Visualforce pages, Apex classes and triggers, my schema, and so forth. What I want to actually do is start by adding my custom app definition for my survey app. So I just checked it and added it to my change set. Well, now I could go through and click the Add button again and select additional components, but I'm going to use the second button instead. Now that I have something in my change set, the View Add Dependencies button goes through and it searches through all my other metadata, and it figures out what are the dependencies for me to be able to use my survey app. So my custom app refers to a set of custom tabs. Those tabs refer to a set of custom objects. Those custom objects have triggers on them. The triggers called classes and so forth. So in all, it finds all of these different things. You can see I've got list views. I've got validation rules. So all of these components are available. And I just have to select all, or I can pick and choose. In the case that I am updating an existing app, it may be that what I actually want to do is only move one Apex trigger and an Apex class, not my entire application. So the View Add Dependencies button gives me the list of dependencies, but it doesn't force me to pick all of them. it's really up to me to decide what I want to move. But once I've decided that my change set is complete, all I have to do is click Upload, and I'm presented with the list of all of the other organizations in my family of organizations that have authorized my dev sandbox to upload to them. So you'll notice production isn't here. So I don't actually want to upload directly from my dev sandbox to production. I want to force my developer to go through the IST sandbox every time. So I'm going to do that now and select IST and click Upload. And so while that's going, what I want to actually do is log out and log into my IST sandbox. So here I'm changing my username. And so now you can see my sandbox is IST. So let's look at it from the receiving side. So I uploaded the change, but it's not actually available to my end users yet. What I need to do is go in and look at my inbound change sets. And so here you can see the survey app that I just created. This is my Dreamforce demo. You can even check the timestamp to keep me honest. And we can go through and look, and here I can see all of the components that are in my change set. And with one click, I can just click Deploy and OK, and it's going to run through, and now all of these changes will be live in my IST org. And when I'm ready, I can then construct a new change set and upload that on to production. And so you can see it was deployed successfully. I can view the results, and I can see a detailed log of all the components that were just created. And so it's really that easy. And so just to wrap up, currently Cloud Deploy is released as beta. What Salesforce.com means by beta is that the features we've released are fully functional, they work. However, there's additional work that we need to do, additional features we need to add for usability reasons and for completeness for us to really declare that this feature is done. So, there are a few things missing. We've added a clone button, a delete button. In Spring 10, we're also adding the ability to deploy a change set during our stagger release. So if your sandbox has been upgraded to Spring 10, but your production organization is still on Winter 10, you can't refresh a Winter 10 sandbox, or sorry, a Winter 10 production org to a Spring 10 sandbox, but you can take changes that you made in production and deploy them across versions, all through Cloud Deploy. So we're really excited about the Spring 10 release and making this feature generally available. At this time, I want to pass control over to Lali Varad, who's going to talk to you a little bit about how we use some of the variety of tools we have in a much more complex scenario within our own Salesforce.com IT organization.
Thank you, Don. So I'm Lali Varad. I'm in IT for Salesforce.com. I'm going to talk about the applications we have, the challenges we have, and what are the different types of deployment process we use, and how do we gain efficiency. Those are the three topics I'm going to touch base on. So a view of our Salesforce.com IT cloud. As you all know, you're all from IT. We have different applications, starting from our own implementation of Salesforce.com applications built on Force.com platform, and our partner or vendor applications. So the applications across different domains, though. So if you see, there is human capital management, finance, customer service, marketing, development, infrastructure, compliance, and risk. The applications that are in red, those are our own implementation of Salesforce.com product. Salesforce automation, that's what we run our business on. I would say we drink our own champagne. That's how I would put it. And there are other examples also in there, like customer service portal and knowledge base, etc. The applications in blue are all built on Force.com platform. Some built by us, some built by our partners. You have seen a lot of applications on App Exchange. We do use those applications internally within our IT domains. And the third set is the SaaS and PaaS products our vendors provide. For example, it's Workday, HCM, ADP, our finance, Coupa, procure-to-pay applications. So across these different applications, how do we do releases? So I want to touch base on the tools before we go to the release management process. The tools we use every day to manage projects and to release product or projects into the life cycle. So the first tool is our Scrum Force. This is a project management tool. I don't know how to point out. There is a tab called User Stories in there. We do agile development, so it's all story-based. So our user stories go in there, and we form Scrum teams, and our Scrum teams definitions go in there. This tool helps us not only to manage the user stories, but also manage the teams, who are available, who are not available, how do we have a predictable release with the capacity we have. The second tool we use is a test repository. It's a QA Force. It's called as QA Force, and we have all our test contents inside this tool. From test cases to test executions, we do monitor test executions inside this tool also. And the third one is a bug force. And this is our defect repository. We use the work item are the defects, and we can do reports of how are we converging towards a release by looking at the defect management system. All these three are built on Force.com platform. You see the word GUS in there. That's a grand unification system. We are looking into combining all the three into one. By February, it will be done, and so that we can do project management right from end to the end of the life cycle. So having touch base on the tools, I'm going to go over the development, agile development and release process, what we have. Going back to what David said, going back to what David said, we do sort of continuous integration in between, continuous integration and this. We do have our own Perforce, which is our source control system. So all our code gets checked into Perforce, whatever shape or form. You might ask us this question, did you guys start like this? No. We have evolved into this. Slowly but surely, we are evolving into a methodical process of doing releases. And the so that is one is, I want to touch base on Perforce. The second one, David touch base is on the run list or the change list. We still use run list and change list to move our configuration changes into production. So to start off with the project, we define the environments we want to use. It could be sandbox, it could be non-sandbox environments, but we always have three environments, starting from development, test, stage, before it goes into production. Each environment has its own access controls, so you can use it for SOX controls or role and responsibilities. Dev environment, dev would have the control. Test, only the QE team would have control. Stage, it's only the release engineering team. Production environment is only our production support team. This really helps us to monitor who does what and how we carry over the changes. The third one, what we use is our and build and deploy. Since we use Perforce, it is very convenient for us to use the and build and deploy tool. So let me go over the process once. If we take development, say for example, we are making a feature change to our opportunity or our code project within our application. We do development in the development environment. Then along with the development, we create the run list. That is the ownership of the developers. And then the code gets checked into Perforce. Once it is done, the release manager would file a ticket. So this is the process we follow through, irrespective of any project we do. The release manager would create a ticket, and the release engineer would create a patch in the Perforce. So this helps us to move away from main, and now we are in patch. The patch gets logged. Do we allow changes in the patch? Yes, we do. Because we are more, what do we say? We are agile development, and we have feature changes so often. So we do allow both feature changes and defects into the patch environment. And QE will do the build and deploy and do the testing, and we also do test automation in that environment. Once QE signs off in this environment, then release manager would create a GUS ticket. GUS is our defect repository. They will do a ticket to create a freeze branch. Once a freeze branch is created in Perforce, it gets locked. At this time, we do not allow any feature changes into the branch at all. It's only the defect fixes that are allowed at this time. And QE would do the end-to-end testing, and we do the sign-off, before which I forgot to touch base on this. The release engineer would do the deploy to the stage environment following the run list. So this is the second checkpoint where we validate the run list before we give it to the production support team. Once we get all the sign-off in the stage environment, the process we go through is we have a change advisory board, which is called as CAB. We go present the case, that is the release manager responsibility, get approval from the CAB, and then they will take the code from stage into production by following the run list and from the Perforce. This is a regular iterative process we follow through, with the exception of label level changes or small changes that can be done in the production by the production support team by filing cases. Even those are tracked by support first tickets. And the next, so we have seen the applications, we have seen the tools, we have seen the release management process. I want to touch base on automation, which gives us a lot of leverage to gain efficiency in the whole process. Our automation goes across both our products built on Salesforce.com platform, and also our vendor products. It constitutes of 5 pillars. We use the open source Java code. So we have the common utils, and we have a prod test, which is a Selenium test, which gives us the UI automation and self. Apex F-test, whoever used Force.com platform would know Apex. And our web services support SOAP and REST protocols, and we have a database utils. The entire suite, we call it as framework, and it supports 4 different layers, and we have continuous integration with this framework, and the results gets automatically uploaded to QA Force, and the last part of defect getting automatically entered in GUS, we are working on it. We haven't completed that part yet. So how do we use this framework? You did see a lot of applications in the first slide I showed you. So for example, it's a Dreamforce application, or an App Exchange application, or a HNT portal. We look at the application and see, okay, what's most beneficial? Where we should focus on our automation? For a Dreamforce application, it's a usability. It's a more users. It's a UI interface that's more important. So we decided to focus on prod test, whereas the developer would focus on the F-test. So this is kind of, we share our responsibility within the Scrum team. But if you take an application like App Store, which is a back office application, we use Apex F-test. We have some self-test because of our third-party integration with Commersion. And one another, all the financial systems, HCM systems, those are all vendor applications with which we integrate with using API or web services, for which we use our web services protocol. And DWETL is our data warehouse ETL, which we use internally, and that's a database utility what we use. For example, if we have a new project called services management, when it comes into IT, how do we decide which tool we should pick? So we look into the, okay, this is services management. Where is it built on? Force.com platform. Okay, you should have 3 different layers. So then we take Apex F-test. That is our first tool. Our second tool becomes services because we have integration with third-party vendors. And the third one is a prod test. So this is how we select, we automate, and based on the automation, we have 3 levels of test: a build verification test, a regression test, and a full suite. Our build verification test goes along with the build and deploy, so that when the build gets deployed, our build verification runs automatically and gives the results whether the build is ready to be used or not. Even our F-tests are all part of build and deploy. We run our F-test as soon as the build gets deployed, so that we don't waste our time in checking a build that is not ready for test, that's not ready to test. So with all this together, with the release methodology, with having the environments planned, using the appropriate tools like Scrum Force, we have a repository, defect management system, and automation, we are able to achieve agility, predictability, and quality of any release what we do. David?
Okay, so we're actually ahead of time, believe it or not. And so we have time for lots of questions. There's microphones on either side. Please feel free to let us know questions about the Cloud Deploy feature, about how we actually run our IT department.
Hi, David.
Hi.
A question for John. So on the diagram with the release management, you had arrows from production to sandbox, which is obviously how you create the sandbox in the first place. But I'm wondering, with the changes actually happening in the development environment and getting pushed up through production, what's the expectation in terms of how often you actually refresh those sandboxes? And is that something that actually kind of gets phased out because it's always starting in development?
So let me bring that slide back up, because one thing I do want to clarify. While you can deploy changes from, this is the one you were talking about? This is the diagram you're referring to. So when the copy step there, number one, could be a sandbox refresh, or it could be a change set deployment. When I made the slide, I was actually really thinking of that as a sandbox refresh. So I think that the frequency of sandbox refreshes really depends on your rate of change. Of course, sandboxes can be refreshed. The fastest refresh is once per month. It could be that if you have a longer running project, you might want to refresh your sandbox less frequently. But the intention is really that the sandbox environment only needs to be refreshed when you're really kind of when you've completed a project and you're really undertaking a new one. With some of the other slides, I would say you do need to manage your, I think maybe this one would illustrate this. You do need to kind of manage your refresh timing. So, you would not necessarily want to refresh your developer sandboxes and your staging sandboxes at the same time, because what you really want is for your staging sandbox, far right end, to be fresh right before you're deploying to it. So you probably want to save your refresh there until your development work is moving farther along, and maybe as you enter UAT or even starting to complete that, that's when you'd want to refresh your staging sandbox right before you do that deployment.
And many companies actually do have a release train concept where they have periods of the quarter where they are able to release into production. And so you'll find that some companies are doing releases to production once a quarter, and so you'll do the refresh as you're ready to do the staging test just before that release to production. And I actually have one question to ask John. So once a month refresh, not only for full data copy, but also dev and config only?
Yeah, that's correct.
And do we have any plans to change that?
We are certainly hoping to decrease the refresh time for the developer and config only sandboxes. I can't talk about a specific date, but that is something that we're basically one big infrastructure project we're undertaking is really redesigning the whole sandbox copy process from the ground up, and we're going to realize some great benefits from doing that, and we're hoping to pass those benefits along to our customers by decreasing the sandbox refresh intervals.
Great, thank you. Next question.
Using the Cloud Deploy product in a multi-developer environment where one developer has put a change set up to the sandbox and selected a set of objects that are associated with that change set. If there's another developer working on a separate development instance who has produced a change set with some of those same objects in it, is there any mechanism for merge or identification of overlap, or is it a last in, first out type environment?
So really, when you're looking for conflict and merge detection, our strategy for that right now is to focus on using your version control system, because most of our customers who are on Enterprise Edition, and certainly those who are on Unlimited Edition, have made investments in these technologies. Not all of them are using them with Salesforce.com yet, but we really see, and what I hear a lot is that customers want to leverage these investments. And so I would say that if that's something that's really critical to your development process, then you're going to want to go with something that's more based around version control and automation. And so Cloud Deploy isn't really suited for that type of problem. These tools have conflict detection and merge. All of those resolution tools are built in, and they're very mature. And so you can become productive with those today using the existing metadata API.
Thank you.
One of the things we struggle with as a company is, especially in this area, is why do we want to reinvent the wheel? If you are using the Eclipse, a lot of developers in the Java community are using Eclipse already, so why not just continue to support Eclipse? And we've looked at, should we build some kind of merged and conflict detection and even effective dating on some of the deployments? And you begin to realize it's a large amount of work to undertake, and the value add over using the tools that people already know and love is relatively minimal. So why should we choose to invest our time and effort into things that you can't already do with tools that you already know? So that's kind of our general philosophy. If we find that the existing tools don't serve the needs of the community in a significant way, then we'll put significant effort in place to try to correct that and facilitate that. But as we've started, we're putting a lot more effort now in application lifecycle management than we had in the past, but we're choosing to use our ammunition in the places that have the most efficacy. Next question.
This is kind of in line with the rest, and I actually have two questions. The first is, what if you have a situation where you have a developer working in the development environment and an administrator in the production environment, and, for example, as part of a merge, you merge a pick list, and the production environment has some values that have been requested by users that were not caught up by the developer, either due to not sync between the two environments? Which side wins? Do we have? Is it clear one side wins over the other? Is there a way to review those before you deploy to identify conflicts like that before they crop up?
So pick list values are a little bit of a thorny problem, as you discovered. My understanding, and I'm not as close to some of these details as I was a few years ago when I was actually out doing implementations here as part of our professional services team, but I believe that, like everything else in the metadata API, pick list values are upserted and merged. So what should happen is that when you deploy, you will get the total set of all the pick list values.
Well, taking a more general example, what if a field value's been or a field type's been changed, say from a pick list to a multi-pick list, or from a pick list to a checkbox or something similar?
So really, it is an upsert. So when you deploy, it will overwrite the existing change in the system. There, I believe, today are some field type changes that the metadata API does not let you do, and so that's one of the things that we're working on.
Okay. The other question I had was, you showed an example of a successful upload. Do you have, or is there somewhere we can go to look at what the output of the cloud deploy would be if there was a failure, and what those reports look like?
Sure. I don't have one that I can just show you right now, but maybe after the session. Essentially, if you recall the view results page where it showed all of the items that were deployed, instead you get a table that includes any component that had an error, and it'll have the error message in the table. So you'll be able to understand what happened and correct it. And really, the most common type of problem that you're going to see is that there was some kind of missing dependency. Unless you selected everything to upload, it's possible that something is a little bit out of sync. So that's where you can go and create a new change set that has the missing component too, and that will let you resolve the problem. Or likewise, if there's Apex test failures, then those test failures are going to show up in that page. It's all in that view results screen.
So I have a follow-up
Okay,
question. I have a follow-up question for that. So if I have a list of 10 changes and some of them fail, do I have a complete rollback, or do I have a partial? Do the ones that installed correctly remain in place?
Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that one. So yes, if there are any failures in your deployment, the entire change set rolls back. So it's not possible to deploy a change set through Cloud Deploy that has any failures in it.
And do you have the ability to test a deployment before you actually commit the deployment?
That is on our roadmap.
Okay.
That was actually my question. At one point, I think in this design, there was going to be a validate button on the Cloud Deploy so that you could actually validate before you actually deployed. And so that's not in the roadmap, or it's like now future?
We are an agile development shop, and so we do our stories in priority.
Okay.
And that is a high priority, but the things that we've delivered already were higher. So it is on our roadmap. That is not going to be in our Spring 10 release, but we're hoping to get that into the Summer 10 release.
And the second question, is there a way for an admin, if I'm doing a major deploy, I don't want any user in my system. Is there an admin lockout that I can say, okay, I can go in and flip a switch in Salesforce and say nobody gets in until I turn it back on?
So that's something that you can achieve in a little bit of a roundabout way. So many of our customers are doing exactly what you've described. But in order to do that, they actually either modify the user's profiles. So they take all of the non-admin profiles and they use like a
that takes a long time.
Like which you can use the metadata API to automate some of those changes.
Could you restrict the IP range to 000 and lock everybody out?
Yeah, something like that. I haven't actually done it myself.
Okay.
To be.
But there is no lockout function right now for an admin.
That is a request that we've heard from a lot of our customers, and it is something that we're looking at for the longer term.
I could add to that. Long-term vision, we are a multi-app platform, so the long-term vision is not only to be able to lock out users, but to effectively lock out an individual app so that you could upgrade a single app while they're still using other apps. But that's like a multi-year kind of effort. One of the I'm trying to remember which session it is, but we're beginning to define apps as something more than just tab sets, and to try to give you a container to manage within your organization. If you think about it as multi-tenancy within a single org, we need to begin to put some of these controls in places and give you an administrative domain so that you can administer the metadata of a particular subset of your metadata with a team of admins, while other admins don't have the ability to do that. And as we begin to put in these kind of firewalls around pieces of metadata, we'll be able to control more carefully users' access to those particular pieces of metadata while you're upgrading them.
So
but there's a lot of infrastructure to put in place before we get there.
You're kind of like pushing the multi-tenancy out to the big users themselves in some respect.
Allowing you to do that. And so the challenge that we have and the struggle that we have is that Salesforce, we have this mantra, keep simple things simple and make difficult things possible. And if you think about the democratization of software, it's about the fact that you're in the same kind of organization that a three-man shop in Poughkeepsie that's just selling to their small market, and they don't really have any professional IT organization. And so we have to develop tools and put processes in place that are simple to understand for people that are not professional administrators, all the way up to the point where we've got the Japan Posts and the Merrill Lynches and the Citibanks of the world who have entire administration organizations that are bigger than our entire development department, doing these kinds of things on a professional basis. So we're trying to do these things in a way that provide the value and the fine control that administrators need in very large shops, but with the simplicity, if you don't take advantage, if you don't opt into these kinds of processes, that it's still really easy to maintain for a small shop.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would add to that I think that there's maybe a history in the software industry of believing that because someone is technical, it's not important to make their tools usable, and we don't believe that.
Okay.
Hi. My question is regarding the CI server. Do you provide a cloud deploy utility so that we can use within our CI server? How does that happen? How does that deploy work with customer-based CI server?
So I didn't quite get the question.
I didn't quite hear the question either.
So basically, like, how does the customer use his own CI server to deploy the changes to the sandboxes?
His own
production.
So this would be The blue arrows would represent check-ins and check-outs, either using the Force.com IDE as that connection point between the org and the version control system, or for the parts you want to automate, that would be the Ant scripting tool.
Actually, if you just to add to what John said, if you're using this process, if you have multiple development, and if you're using Perforce, and deploy would be the better tool to use.
Yeah, like
because it is more developers. There's a lot of projects going, and the main is going to be a lot of lines of code. So that gives you the flexibility.
Okay. Yeah, because we have Hudson as our CI server, and I was just thinking, whether we can leverage that to do automated deployment to the sandbox in production. Or
yeah, most continuous integration servers too, like Hudson or Cruise Control, already are compatible with Ant. So that Ant library can be used for these types of scenarios. When you want to have that continuous integration server automating these processes.
And my next question is regarding the Scrum processes. Those applications you showed, are they available on AppExchange for customers to use, or?
Scrumforce, I don't believe, is on the AppExchange.
I don't believe it is on AppExchange.
I think there are pieces of it up there, so you should take a look at the AppExchange and see. There may be some bug tracking or some Scrum management, but I'm not sure.
I heard today in the keynote from CA CEO that Scrumforce and they are working on something in conjunction for agile development too. So maybe that is something that will come up in our AppExchange too now.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, CA is taking that and productizing it.
Yeah.
In the development pattern where you use a version control system, do you usually have each developer pull 100% of all the code into their branch?
No, I would say that what you really want to do is, to get down to the details a little bit, what you want to have is a common package.xml file, because that's going to define the scope of the changes. And so you want to have 100% of the files you're working on, 100% of the project. But in most cases, that's going to be much smaller than the entire organization.
So then each developer pulls a subset, and you merge to the development branch, the middle red line there. Does that contain 100% of the code?
So, that's a good question, and I would say that it really is going to depend on how complex your environment is, how many different projects you're running. In some cases, it is going to make sense to try to pull most of your metadata in, but if you are doing that, you really want the lines in your vertical system to more or less match each other. So I think that it is going to be a better practice to just have completely different, even main lines for different parts of the application. And there can be a little bit of complexity there, because of some of the changes that can happen to the same file but in two different repositories. But ultimately, at some point, you do want to try and kind of merge those back together. So some of this we're still working out some of the edge cases for that, and so you're going to see a lot of improvements in the platform in making this even more streamlined than it is today in the future.
So just an example from the IT, we do have full code line patch and freeze and prod. We do, depending on the projects. For smaller projects, we do the delta. For bigger projects, we do the full code line.
Okay. And do you have any tools? A lot of times we find it's hard to develop in the developer sandbox without any data, and people jump over to the staging sandbox because it takes time to get the data together you need to test.
So the data loader can be used to extract the records that you want that are appropriate from your production organization and then load it over into your various sandboxes. And you can even take those CSV files and check them into your version control system and automate. The data loader has a command line interface, so you can put that into your Ant scripts to call it.
The data loader, though, it doesn't help you find a set of related data that's coherent.
So we've been looking at that problems. John's got a lot of things on his priority list, but one of the things that we would like to get to is in our mobile environment, for example, you have this notion of a briefcase, and a briefcase is a collection of data that is related to me in some cases with the dependent data to it, right? And so we would like to look at taking that briefcase metaphor and maybe even those tools and allowing that for a partial data copy But John knows what his schedule looks like for the next year, and so he's probably hesitant to even bring that
Well,
one
I'll
up.
vote for that idea. Thank you.
Within our IT environment, we have our own test data creation scripts that we create our test data and we populate it. We can use it across the both dev and test sandboxes.
And so, do you publish any of those?
We haven't published any of those. I don't know what is in plans. I'm looking at David and John here. It is all internal, like I showed you all the other stuff. We have it for internally to have effectiveness built in, but we will get back to you on that.
I mean, one of the other things that we're cognizant of is when you're copying into test environments, there are many times when you need to fix up endpoints, and you don't really want to do a 100% data copy. You want to do a data copy, but you want to preserve or change over some things, right? And so we're looking at all of those and trying to figure out what things are accomplishable today, but maybe with a little bit of a pain, and let's work on the things that you just don't have any workarounds today. So that's the struggle for us is we see all of this, we see all of these issues, and we want to work on the ones that are pain points, but we got to work on the ones that are impossible first. Right. Next question.
Maybe you could help clear up some frustrations I'm having trying to use the force deploy. I was using Eclipse, and that was working out fine. So I was starting to play around with the force deploy, and I'm in a dev sandbox. I build my change sets, push it, log into the other environment. There it is. Everything's going great. I hit the deploy button, and it fails. I forgot something. Go back to the dev sandbox. Things closed. I can't use it. It's like I have to start over again. It's very frustrating. So I just pull in the other element through another, change set, push that up, get that in there. Now I'm in my QA environment. I finally got everything in there, and it seems to be working. Now I want to take that stuff and go to production, but I can't reuse that. Now I got to build another change set. What am I doing wrong?
Sir, what you want is the clone button, and it's coming in Spring 10.
Okay. I want that and the validate button.
Validate.
You'll have to wait a little bit longer, but we're going to get there.
All right.
Hi. We've been experiencing some issues pushing profiles with the ANT tool. Specifically, it doesn't push everything like record type assignments, and we've also experienced some issues around the product object, and we don't use products in our business at all, and for some reason every time we try and push we get this error on CRUD permissions on product. And so I'm wondering if the cloud deploy, being that it should be completely in sync with your API versioning, that if that helps resolve any of those type of issues. I mean, the push process worked really well for us for code, configuration, everything. Profiles have just been painful, and I don't know why.
So I think the biggest challenge with profiles is that they shouldn't be called profiles in the metadata API, because that's not what they are. They're actually really profile permissions, as I'm sure you realize. So the way that profiles work is based on what else you download in your metadata retrieve. You also get, if you request a profile, you get the permissions only for those other things you download. So the goal for that is really to migrate the set of permissions. Like if I download 4 custom objects, I can also get the field level security on those objects for the profiles I select and migrate those over. So really, by calling them profiles initially, I think we were a little over ambitious, and that's caused so much confusion. So in fact, when we add profiles to change sets, what we're really going to add, we're going to call them profile permissions and make it very clear in the user interface about what the behavior actually is. Longer term, we're actually looking at breaking up the profile into smaller units of permissions. And so these permission sets will be much more logical and much more easily migratable. And so we're going to add more of the kind of top-down capability to download those into the metadata API, but we're going to wait and not do that for profiles, because profiles are just gigantic. I think that the little factoid we like to share is that for our internal Salesforce CRM implementation, our profile, if you printed it out, would be 32 feet long.
Right, so in the future, we won't have to necessarily push every element of the profile to get the functionality that we're looking to deploy.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're out of time, and I really appreciate your attendance. We will remain up here for a few more minutes if you guys have any other questions that we didn't get to. Otherwise, are we doing surveys and things this?
Yeah, we have.
Go to the end. Please create your online survey and enter to win a looks like an iPod.
Looks like an iPod.
Looks like an iPod. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.